Good day and welcome to the Keizer Oral History Project. This is another installment brought to you by the Keizer Points of Interest Committee, part of the City of Keizer. Today we're honored to have with us Dr. Vernon Casterline, who was Keizer's very first physician to open up shop here in town. What we were going to start out by telling us how the first time you saw Keizer.
Yes, the story's supposed to be mostly about Keizer, but I have to get myself in it, I guess, in order for me to do that. And I thought I'd start off by telling you the very first time I saw Keizer was in early part of 1937. I'd been out of high school a year and a half, then I came out to Salem the end of December, 1st of January to start Willamette University, take a pre-med course. And it was difficult to get my schedule started because I started on second semester. But one of my early classes was a botany class, and we made a field trip out toward Keizer. To get to the area we were going, we came down Cherry Avenue and crossed the railroad track behind the blind school, and then proceeded down that little grade, and to our right was a wooded area. It was called Painter's Woods. And I think I learned later that it was spelled P-A-Y-N-T-E-R. So we looked for some wildflowers, and before we went back to the school, we followed Cherry Avenue on down to where we saw a little schoolhouse, and that was the Keizer School. And there were some buildings there in that area, but I don't remember how many, but there were a few. So that was Keizer, and that was my first time I saw that. Well, that plays in my family somehow because toward the end of 1930s, my Aunt Nora and her husband Ben were living in a little house on the point where River Road and Wheatland Road join. And they had a little old house there. They had a nut dryer on the premises, and they were caretakers of the Stotz McNary farm, which was right across the road where now there's the McNary Golf Course. And they had trees on that property, and I found myself on a Crawley tractor one time and disking between those trees. I barked a few of them, but never got in too much trouble about that. But in doing this, I got a close-up view of Senator McNary's summer home. It's a little white cabin there on the little creek that runs through there, and on his shingle it was called Fir Cone. And the fireplace, I remember, was quite prominent. It was made of these river-run rocks about like a football or a softball. So they had a little water wheel there, and that water wheel, after they built the golf course, wound up over at the coast at the Pixie Kitchen. And it was the kind of a landmark, and we'd go over there for dinner. We'd stop by and look up the little waterfall again, water wheel. So I went on to medical school and came back. I was going to practice in Salem, and I said, I wonder where I should practice. I'd like to do it here in Salem somewhere. My Aunt Nora said, why don't you come to Keizer? I said, Keizer? Well, that wasn't much. Yeah, but now you ought to see it. And sure enough, it blossomed about maybe 7,500 to 10,000 people. So that's about what it was. And I set up my shingle in Friday, September the 8th, 1950. And joining me in the venture was Dr. Jerry Bowerly. I bumped into Jerry by way of my cousin George Casterline, who was a dentist. I went to dental school, and he knew this Jerry Bowerly. They had gone to school in a little town of Mabel, out east of Eugene, grade school and high school. So he knew that I was going to set up my practice, so told Jerry, and Jerry looked me up, so we joined forces there. And the building was on 4942 River Road North, which after I moved out became Stretch and Sew office, or building.
So can you give us some perspective on where along River Road that is? Or what's there now?
Well, I can identify the building, but I'm not sure of the number now. We used to park right in front of the building, but that parking has been taken up by widening the streets. And so they had a smoke shop, a smoke fish and that kind of stuff toward the back on the north side or south side. But I'm not sure how to identify it, except it's just not very far from the Savings and Loan building on River Road, right across from where the Boucher jewelry store is now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So what did your Aunt Nora say to you to convince you to open up shop in Keizer?
She said, "Well, you ought to see Keizer now." And so I looked, and then I looked. It looked like the bill, so I proceeded to make arrangements for that to happen. And there were three young ladies here in Keizer that were very helpful. There were Betty Ham, and then there was Dorothy Teeter and Alice Anderson, and another one is I can't think of her name right now. Dorothy Lamer. Yeah, she was the one that's very helpful.
So what roles did they play in getting your practice
Well,
up
they
and running?
kind of saw that I got someone to get some spaces available to build a building on, and they're just in with cookies and pop once in a while, and were interested in what I was doing and got the word around.
Well, what medical services were available in Salem Keizer at the time, much less Keizer?
In Keizer, there was nothing. I was the first practice in Keizer. Dr. Bill Crothers lived in Keizer, but his office was in the Hollywood area of Salem. And his brother, Morris Crothers, was a surgeon with the Salem Clinic. No, he's at the doctor's clinic, I'm sorry, up by Salem General Hospital. And he got very heavy in politics. And there were several other doctors in the Hollywood area. Bert Trust was the GP there, and there was another doctor who was eye, nose, and throat.
So when, if there was a case that you couldn't handle out of general practice, so you would have been a general practitioner.
Yes, the general practice.
Was that the term then?
Yes.
So when you had a case that kind of was outsized to what the facilities and you had there, where did you send them?
I had worked at the Salem Deaconess Hospital for years while I was going to Willamette for board and room, so I became acquainted with several of the doctors around town. And I had some ready-made referral system set up, and so that it was really handy to have that. And I was liberal with offering referrals because if I wasn't sure, I wasn't going to bull ahead and do something without another opinion. So I was doing second opinions before it became popular to do so.
What was it like working with Dr. Bowerly?
Well, it was great. He was great. We would share cases once in a while. I had something been at the toothache, so he's right there to take care of that, and vice versa. But he had the front office suites, and I had the rear one. So actually, we didn't really meet to talk very long every day, but he had a nice family.
So that was back when doctors still made house calls regularly.
Oh, yeah.
What were some of the adventures you went on during those years?
Those house calls, yeah. I remember those ruts down those streets off of Cherry Avenue. Boy, it just about wrecked my car. I had a little Chevy, and I'd making house calls on. Some of them would be on welfare, but they'd have a TV antenna up on the roof and that little Cadillac parked in the front yard. Here I was pushing that little Chevy. I couldn't afford a TV yet, I didn't think. And I was single too when I first started my practice. So, but later, after we got married in 1952, and so then I had to change my ways, get a television, and a few other things that I'd been doing without. I was accustomed to doing without. I was raised during the Big Depression, and my first bicycle I got when I was going to Willamette. I was living in the Hollywood area, and so I had a long ways to go to classes. So I bought a used bike for $10 from Harry Scott, and I bought it and paid for it, pushed it out of the store, and headed it north. Went to the corner, turned left, went down the front street, and turned the thing right again. Then I tried to get on it and ride it out to Hollywood. I got my wheels in the track 2 or 3 times, but by the time I got out there, I could ride pretty good. Then my first car I didn't have till I started my practice down here in Keizer. And that was the '49 Chevy.
So did you?
I getting back those house calls. Made several of them. You get about $5 for a house call. Office calls were $3. I got very little help or information or suggestions during internship about about the office business of practicing medicine, what it takes. But there's a lot to it that you don't get when you're in training.
Mm-hmm.
So you learn it as you go along. And I remember one lady had terrific abdominal pain, upper abdominal, vomiting and retching. So after examining her and listening to her story, I told her, I think you have a acute gallbladder. You better go into the hospital and have that operated on. Well, so she reluctantly agreed to do this. But she was saying, I think it must have been that liver's worth I had. So, and something else that kind of tickled me when we was getting ready to open up my practice one evening. We were decorating the house, getting it all set up. A lady walked by the door, and she saw the lights were on, so she tried the door. It was open. She came in and looked around, wanted to know what it's going to be, and we told her it's the doctor's office, and someone pointed to me as being the doctor. So she went to me and said, you know, my husband has been having this or that and hasn't been feeling well for the longest time, and we've tried all the symptoms we know, but nothing's helped. I wonder if you can give me some suggestions. And I think she brought him in the next few days, and we got that straightened out.
So $5 would take you a lot further then than it will now, obviously.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But even that was a lot to ask from some people. What were some of the creative ways people paid you?
Oh, we received some groceries and some eggs and stuff like that, and chicken, stuff like that.
So what about the time they mounted your trout?
Well, yeah, well,
Can we get the story behind the trout?
behind that was, got myself married, and then we went on a honeymoon up at Pondere Lake in Idaho. So part of that was a boat ride and a fishing trip with a guide. We could use two lines, a surface line for the small fish, the little kokanee and trout, and a deep line, which is made of Monel metal, and which is jointed every so many feet, and had a big, heavy Louis plug on it, about that long. And that one would go down the deep water. I was trolling for the big Kamloops trout, it's a rainbow trout, nice big lake size, about so like that. So it was getting along towards sunset, and we had pretty good luck with the surface line. Our line finally got tangled, the boat stopped, we got the lines untangled. That gives the heavy line a chance to settle down. Well, we got the tangles out, we started the boat up, and bang, that big, heavy, deep one went off. So we cranked him in. It was about a 20.5-pound Kamloops. Brought him home, and we had him mounted by someone for the fee there was delivering the baby for the couple. And a similar story was I had my next door neighbor for delivery there. I got my backyard fireplace built for smoking things and stuff like that.
How many babies do you think you helped deliver during?
Well, I kept track for a time, and then I dropped off doing deliveries, so I suppose maybe close to 100. But it's interesting. My very first delivery was an interesting situation. Dr. Bob Anderson from Staten, whom I'd known for years, said, Vern, I'm going to go on vacation. I wonder if you take my OB calls. I don't have anybody due right now, so everything should be fine. Okay. He wasn't gone 1 week, and a lady came in labor, and she had twin boys. So my first delivery was twin boys. My next delivery was a boy. My next one was a boy. It got to be 10 boys, got 11 boys. And for making an even dozen, I had a lady in labor with, she was a student nurse where I was interning, delivered a little girl, happened to have a hair lip and cleft palate. So I don't know what the moral is there, but that's the way it turned out. If there is a moral, I don't know.
So who was your nurse when you first started?
When I first started, the nurse was Skip Libby. Skip's husband was a pharmacist over in Molalla, and Skip had worked with the doctor, a GP in Salem for years. So I felt kind of fortunate to be able to get her. She lived out here in Keizer, so she dropped her work there and came out with me. And she had a sense of humor, was comical. So since I was single the first 2 years, some of our patients would join us, and we'd go to a place like Leonard's for an evening. And one of my patients was rheumatoid arthritis victim. So we'd gotten some ACTH had to be given by shots for the arthritis. ACTH stands for adrenal corticotrophic hormone. It stimulates the adrenal gland to make this cortisone. So that was a boon for these people with arthritis. So we'd be at our table and they'd watch the clock. Skip would have stopped by the office and picked up the injectables and the needles and the syringes and the medicine and take it to the party we're going to. And then when the clock got to about 10 o'clock, they disappeared down a hall in some corner. And he would expose the upper outer quadrant of his hip. And she would deposit the medication there, and they'd come back to the table and finish our evening. This would repeat itself now and then.
So who was the second doctor in Keizer?
Second doctor was the son of one of the school teachers in the old Keizer school, Vance Young. Vance was with me for a year or two, and then he went over to the coast in the Tillamook area, and I've lost track of Vance once he got over there. I don't know where he went after that. So I was alone for most of the time. The first 6 years I was at 4942, then in 56 I moved across the street where we had new quarters built. And there's the pharmacy there. Earl Mutry had that pharmacy, and so I was there till 86.
And your office the practice you started is still going today, isn't it?
Well, it is, and with a different management. I sold my practice in 86 to a young man I met when he was a freshman. He's a classmate of my son Vern's at med school in Portland, and I met him in the anatomy lab. As it turned out, he's the one that opted to come to Keizer and buy out my practice. And then he brought Jay Jameson with him, and they have two lady doctors in with her now. And they moved from those quarters and built a new facility just behind the U.S. Bank in Keizer.
I see. So when kind of switching gears here, so you were obviously here when there was talk of incorporation
Yeah.
with into its own city. Where'd you fall on that at the time?
At the time, I wasn't in favor of it. Here was those old things hanging on to me about pinching pennies and doing this and that like I grew up with. At that time, we had a sewer line pretty well with county sewers going through. We had the county mounties for police, and we had our own fire department. And the water, we had bar none, we had a best water department you could ask for. I couldn't see why duplicating service like they have in Salem. But as it turned out, it was something really to be proud of here. Yeah.
What is it when you look back on how often do you run into maybe your older patients or maybe their children or even their grandchildren? What do they have to say?
Oh, they say I'm looking good, and someone said, "Remember, Doc, when you were young?" They said, "Boy, you're good looking." And now they see, "So oh, you're looking good." That's about the way that goes.
When you're did any of the floods ever affect your office or your business?
The flood?
Mm-hmm.
It got up to the front door, but it didn't go across the threshold. Yeah.
Did you run into any? Were there any actual injuries or things you had to treat as a result?
Not as a direct result of that. Very fortunate there. Yeah.
So real quick, tell us a little bit more about how your Aunt Nora and Uncle Ben, were they from this area?
Well, I think Ben had been raised around this area. He'd been married to a daughter of Ole Harold. Ole Harold lived down Jamala Road, a little ways past where Windsor Island Road takes off, and he had a fruit orchard there. And his daughter, who the first wife of Ben, died of tuberculosis. And Ben had three boys, Norman, Llewellyn, and Benny. Little Benny wound up with TB at the hip, so he was kind of in bed most of the time. So, but my Aunt Nora and I were raised in Minnesota. Yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
I think we're about out of time for our offering today. I want to thank Dr. Casterline for coming out and participating with us. Again, my name is Jason Cox, and you can learn more about the Oral History Project at keizer.org. Thank you very much.